World leaders take part in the high-level political forum of the 78th General Assembly of the United Nations Organization, focused on sustainable development goals. The countries of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, began their first joint naval maneuvers following the summit held in Indonesia in early September. And the Indian government announced the expulsion of a senior Canadian diplomat in response to the Canadian authorities' accusations against an Indian national. Hello from the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba. This is From the South, and I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. And now we begin with the news. On Tuesday in the United States, the 78th United Nations General Debate Sessions kicks off as part of the period of high-level discussions that runs through September 26. The 2023 United Nations General Debates urges the world leaders to consider the 2030 Agenda, which includes the deadline for its 17 Sustainable Development Goals. It calls for accelerated action to achieve the goals in order to promote peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability for all. In the meantime, Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva confirmed that he will be the first speaker. The South American leader's address will take place 20 years after his debut at the General Assembly and 14 years after his last speech as the President of Brazil. World leaders are participating in the high-level political forum of the 78th General Assembly of the United Nations Organization, focused on the Sustainable Development Goals, starting on Monday. The meeting will last until Tuesday, September 19th. The meeting will be held at the organization's headquarters in New York City, United States. Among the central issues to be discussed by the leaders of the 190 member nations are climate change, the war in Ukraine, and the economic, humanitarian, and security crisis facing the world. During his speech, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, stressed the need to generate a global plan focused on rescuing the Sustainable Development Goals. During the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals Summit, the President of Argentina, Alberto Fernandez, stressed his desire that the rights and values of all workers be respected in Argentina and the world.
Dear President, our goal is to generate dignified jobs with labor rights in Argentina and the world. We want to integrate ourselves in the global value chain. We don't want to compete for investments that deteriorate the rights and salaries of workers.
On the other hand, Venezuela's Foreign Minister Iván Gil reiterated that despite the sanctions imposed on his country, Venezuela will keep working to guarantee its commitments with the Sustainable Development Guidelines and goals.
We believe that it is crucial that we develop access to environmental technology and set new goals that will enable greater production with less use of resources and reduce the polluting impact on a global level. In this regard, Venezuela will continue to work tirelessly to its commitments under sustainable development, despite the imposition of a great number of unilateral coercive measures that have had a very damaging impact in many areas of life.
The representative of St. Kitts and Nevis stated during the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals Summit that international support is a must for the people of the world.
International support for the SDG agenda is a must. We call for and support the call for innovative financial instruments, predictable climate finance, debt relief, concessional financing, centering of justice, amplifying of the voices of the smallest nations and the most vulnerable people, the promotion of equity, and the increase in political will and solidarity amongst all global stakeholders planet-wide.
On Monday, the Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermúdez fulfilled a busy agenda in New York, the U.S., ahead of his participation in the United Nations 78th General Assembly. The Cuban delegation arrived at the United Nations headquarters to begin his week-long participation in several high-level meetings. The Cuban head of state met with several presidents and representatives of small island nations that will also attend the top-level gathering. In a meeting with Denis Francis, the President of the United Nations, at its 78th session, as he confirmed Cuba's commitment to multilateralism and the UN Charter, as well as to the implementation of the Agenda 2030 development goals. They also discussed the results and the proposals emanating from the Cuba G77 summit. The President also paid homage to the social activist and icon of the civil rights movement, Malcolm X. Let's move on to other topics and other regions of Latin America. Ecuador's presidential candidate for the Citizens' Revolution Party, Luisa González, requested an investigation on an alleged assassination attempt against her. The presidential candidate pointed out that last August 30th, 2023, a plan to attack her was discovered and several people were arrested in possession of weapons and drugs. González denounced that some state entities are trying to prevent the accused from appearing at the prosecutor's office to render their versions of what happened during the attempted attack. The presidential candidate also asked the public prosecutor's office to allow her to be part of the investigation.
They have not been brought to the prosecutor's office or been contacted. There is an audio tape that has been leaked where you can clearly hear that the intention was not to attend against my life. I have filed a complaint today, a complaint that not only represents the need to safeguard my life and to clarify this process and find those responsible for a possible attempt on my life, but to safeguard the life of all Ecuadorians, because we are living in impunity.
In Brazil, a demonstration was held to demand the removal of Cuba from the list of countries sponsoring terrorism. The Levante Popular da Juventude movement carried out a protest in front of the United States consulate in Rio de Janeiro to demand the lifting of all the sanctions applied by Washington against Havana. Members of the movement pointed out that these actions prevent the Cuban government from trading with the U.S. business persons and impose credit barriers. During the G77 plus China summit, the Brazilian president Lula da Silva also criticized his policy of the United States against Cuba.
Today, we, members of the Levante Popular da Juventude movement, came to the General Consulate of the United States in Rio de Janeiro to reject United States imperialism and to press for the removal of Cuba from the list of countries that sponsor terrorism. Cuba is an example of solidarity in all the world, in health, in education, and today it suffers from a blockade that prevents it from continuing to advance in many areas and also prevents it from engaging in commercial and political exchange with other countries.
Let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at TeleSUR English, where you will find the news in different formats, news updates and more. Other stories coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Russian President Vladimir Putin said at a cabinet meeting on Monday that the nation's economy has completed its recovery.
In April, the GDP growth for the current year was expected at 1.2%. Initially, they actually predicted some minus for us, but then the forecast was corrected. 1.2% was expected. But in fact, we have already exceeded this bar, and by the end of the year, the GDP growth may reach the level of 2.5%, perhaps even more, 2.8%. In general, the situation regarding the execution of the current federal budget is stabilizing. In August, it was once again executed with a surplus. Yes, in general, so far, starting from the year, there is a slight deficit, but in August there is already a surplus. And not for the first time. It is important that non-oil and gas revenues are significantly higher than last year's figures. In turn, oil and gas budget revenues in July-August recovered approximately to the level of the last year, and taking into account the situation on world markets, active growth continues.
On Monday, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov met his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi in Moscow for China-Russia strategic security consultations.
I would like to note the importance of Russian-Chinese cooperation for ensuring justice in world affairs, for ensuring a balance of interests in those processes that are developing in a variety of directions.
Both China and Russia are committed to their own independent foreign policies. Our bilateral cooperation is not directed against anyone and is not subjected to outside interference.
The Chinese foreign minister highlighted the strategic role China and Russia play in maintaining global strategic stability and world progress.
At the same time, China and Russia, as leading world powers and permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, bear a special responsibility in maintaining global strategy stability and world progress. The more violent the unilateral actions of hegemony become, it is even more important for us to keep up with the times, show a sense of duty as great powers, and further fulfill our international obligations.
Authorities in Beijing highlighted that China-ASEAN relations have become the most successful and dynamic model of Asia-Pacific regional cooperation. During the opening ceremony of the 20th Exposition China-ASEAN and the 20th Commerce and Investment Summit, both events celebrated in Nanning, the capital of the autonomous region Zhuan of Guangxi, in the south of the country, Chinese Premier Minister Li Qian highlighted the continuous development of the bilateral relations since they were established 20 years ago. The functionary specified that although it was not been easy, both sides have managed to work in a committed manner to strengthen cooperation. Li Qian also highlighted that these relationships are based on sincerity, inclusion, and commitment to achieve mutual benefits. And the countries of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, began their first joint naval maneuvers on Tuesday, following the summit held in Indonesia in early September. In a statement, the Indonesian military said that the maneuvers, called Asian Joint Training Exercises, will take place until September 23rd in the Natuna Islands, located in the northwest of the Indonesian archipelago and in the south of the South China Sea. The authorities informed that the exercises will not include combat simulation, but rather maritime security and cooperation in case of emergencies and natural disasters. The countries participating in the exercises are Indonesia, Myanmar, Brunei, Cambodia, the Philippines, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. Portugal's education sector workers began a week-long strike started on Monday. The Union of All Education Professionals stated that the strike will last until Friday, and it is the first with an impact on the teaching activity in the year 2023-2024. Teachers denounced the lack of technical assistance, school staff, and poor working conditions. It is expected that on September 22nd, the education professionals will hold a demonstration in Lisbon. The union also stated that the protests will continue until their demands are met. In Italy, workers of the automotive giant Stellantis in Melfi called an 8-hour strike to demand better working conditions. Production was stopped at the factory due to the lack of components, which, according to the unions, is between 9% and 100% adhered to, while according to the company it is limited to 25% of its regular rhythm. The workers explained that the strike is to demand employment guarantees, greater state investment in the sector, and to reject the company's lack of response in terms of work organization, safety, and workloads. Italy on Monday extended detention periods for illegal immigrants to deter arrivals after record boat crossings from North Africa to Lampedusa Island saw the country's southernmost tip overwhelmed. The cabinet of far-right Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni increased from a maximum of 135 days to 18 months the detention time for immigrants to be expelled from Italy. In a message to all of Africa, Meloni has revealed that if they trust the smugglers to break Italian laws, when they arrive in Italy, they will be detained and then repatriated. For the migration specialist Alfonso Giordano, the professor at the Luiss University of Rome, it is difficult to guarantee the return of the migrants. Giordano also doubted that the extension of the time of detention will work as a deterrent. We have a second short break coming up, but before, we invite you to visit our YouTube channel at TeleSUR English, and there you will be able to rewatch our interviews, the top stories, the special broadcastings, and more. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell to stay up to date on the world's most recent events. We have a final short break. Don't go away. Welcome back. The Indian government announced this Tuesday the expulsion of a senior Canadian diplomat in response to the Canadian authorities' accusation that the Asian country was involved in the murder of its territory of one of its citizens. According to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the diplomat will have to leave India in the next few days in a measure that reflects the growing concern about the interference of Canadian diplomats in our internal affairs, according to the statement. The assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a separatist leader of Indian origin, which occurred last June in the town of Surrey in western Canada, triggered a diplomatic crisis between the two countries. Nijjar was shot by an unknown gunman in the parking lot of a Sikh temple and had been accused of terrorism by the Indian authorities for advocating the creation of the independent state of Khalistan. Iran and the United States carried out on Monday an exchange of 10 prisoners, 5 from each side, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Nazar Kanani confirmed at a press conference. Also, nearly $6 billion in Iranian assets were unfrozen. The 5 U.S. citizens imprisoned in Iran were released, said Kanani, who gave details of the fate of the other 5 Iranians who were released by Washington. He pointed out that 2 of the Iranian citizens entered Iran upon request and interest. One of them was transferred to a third country due to the presence of his family, and the other 2 expressed their wish to stay in the U.S. Kanani also said that it is also planned to exchange 10 prisoners, 5 of them on a part-and-part basis. Kanani also said that the release of Iran's funds in South Korea is also scheduled for Monday. The announcement comes as Iran's Syed Ebrahim Raisi, the president, traveled to New York to participate in the United Nations General Assembly. In Saudi Arabia, UNESCO's 45th World Heritage Committee moves forward to inscribe new locations on the list of World Heritage Sites. During the meeting, which will be held until September 25th, the nominations for the inscription of around 50 sites on the World Heritage List are being examined, including 37 cultural sites and 12 natural sites. In addition, the reforms concerning the borders of the heritage sites are discussed. The UNESCO Committee is in charge of evaluating the situation of the registered sites and receiving reports and proposals presented by the directors of the areas in order to improve the work of heritage conservation. Now we move on to other topics. Hundreds of protesters rallied in Libya's disaster-hit Derna on Monday, accusing the authorities of neglect after a huge flash flood devastated the coastal city and swept thousands of their deaths. Demonstrators gathered outside the city's Grand Mosque and chanted slogans against the parliament in East Libya and its leader Agla Saleh. A statement read on behalf of the protesters urged a speedy investigation and legal action against those responsible for the disaster. They also demanded a United Nations office in Derna and the start of the city's reconstruction plus compensation for affected residents, and a probe into the current city council and previous budgets. Politicians and analysts said the chaos in Libya since the 2011 fall and killing of Muammar Gaddafi has released or relegated the maintenance of vital infrastructure to the background.
Nobody heard the voices of the people except the security service and armed forces on ground. The people's demands are not heard by MPs and politicians who have unfortunately appointed someone only interested in harming the city. So people protested. People are now demanding a radical change, whether targeting those from the previous regime or that which followed. People want their demands met and the criminals involved to be held accountable.
And like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.
The story goes, you're gonna make it if you try, and if you don't, may your life waste away, 'cause it's your fault. Like the sheen of a rotting fish, the glitter just dazzles. For everyone who's filthy rich, a million must suffer. So start your climb up the money tree. The best slaves are those who think they're free. Oh, Satan, you see Rome is burning. Oh, how it burns. Oh, I feel the burn. As life unfolds, people struggle to make ends meet. Look around, what you see, the